Pallet. I'm the chair-elect of the Beacon Council. Our chairman, Alan Becker, is traveling today and asked me to introduce our speaker. First, I want to welcome you all to the Beacon Council, those of you who have been here before, and a lot of new faces, and we're very pleased to have you. We have another sellout for our Access Breakfast, and we're very proud of that, and we appreciate the support. I also want to take one moment to thank the Hotel Sofitel for being our Access Breakfast sponsors this season, and we certainly appreciate that. I want to also take one moment to introduce Commissioner Mark Sarnoff, who's representing the City of Miami this morning, and appreciate your being here today. Today we're here to discuss another exciting project in our state, and in particular in Miami-Dade. The $1 billion passenger rail service from Miami to Orlando called All Aboard Florida. The effort to create this new service being led by our guest speaker, Hussein Cumber, of the Florida East Coast Industries, a Coral Gables-based transportation and real estate company. The rail service designed for tourists and business executives will use existing tracks and a new extension. The route being planned would extend 240 miles and have a travel time of 3 hours with intermediate stations in Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach. Offer first class, business class, and coach cars, gourmet meals, and Wi-Fi internet access. Of particular interest to us here in Miami-Dade are the plans to develop 9 acres in downtown Miami as part of a Grand Central Station for the new service. That project will generate 1,200 construction-related jobs and more than 400 permanent jobs. Mr. Cumber, our speaker this morning, is the Executive Vice President of Corporate Development for Florida East Coast Railway, we know it as FEC, where he's guided a major capital projects from concept through development. Previously, Mr. Cumber was president of H.A. Cumber & Company, a transportation consulting firm that specialized in rail, transit, and highway issues. He served as Deputy Chief of Staff at the U.S. Department of Transportation, and prior to that as Assistant to the Secretary for Policy. In that role, Mr. Cumber assisted in daily operations of an agency with approximately 60,000 people and a budget of $70 billion. He provided policy direction for highways, motor carriers, pipelines, railroads, including Amtrak, transit, and domestic security issues. On behalf of the Beacon Council and everyone here, I'm very honored to introduce our speaker, Mr. Hussein Cumber.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate the kind introduction, and Frank, thank you for putting this together. I also want to thank Yvette, my Leadership Florida colleague that I know worked hard to put this together. Let me start by mentioning that I've got 3 colleagues in the room with me today that are very instrumental to this project as well. Brian Kronberg, Jose Gonzalez, and Alex Gonzalez. The 3 of them have been working on aspects of this project, from stations to environmental to really helping us get through the due diligence process. So I want to recognize the 3 of them. And then Commissioner Sarnoff, thank you for coming. Big supporter of FEC projects throughout the years, and we really appreciate you being here. This is an exciting project for us. Very exciting from the standpoint of its passenger service in the FEC corridor has been talked about for decades, going back to when Tri-Rail was created. And what's exciting for us is we've been able to find a project that is financially viable without any state, federal grant money, and no operating subsidies. And especially in this economic environment, when we started thinking about how we could use the FEC corridor to bring passenger service, that was a major factor in our decision making, because we knew that if we came out with a project, and the first thing we said is we need a grant from a public agency, and we need an ongoing operating subsidy. It'd be a tough sell in this environment. And so, we're happy to be able to say that through the due diligence process that we've now recently completed, we've decided to move forward with this project, and we've validated the fact that this is financially viable on its own. And so what I'd like to do today is give an overview of the project, and then, Frank, I don't know if we have time for questions at the end, and then really answer, I'm sure a lot of questions that all of you have. Many of you know the historical significance of Florida East Coast industries. Henry Flagler created the rail line over 100 years ago. And what's interesting is there was, both, it was built for passenger service, then freight came, and now we're hoping to bring passenger back. But when you look at the history of Florida East Coast Industries and its tie to the development of the East Coast of Florida, this project we feel will be that second wave of economic development along our line. And when you look at the station locations in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm, and Orlando, the ancillary development opportunities that will come out of that, I think will be significant, where people will compare it to what took place when the original rail line was built. The existing right-of-way is something that's really important for this project. When you think about the high-speed rail project that was contemplated between Miami and Orlando, estimates were $10 billion, take upwards of 10 years to actually build. By leveraging our right-of-way, you're looking at a project that could take just over $1 billion to build, and a fraction of the time that the high-speed rail system would have taken. So the system will travel 230 miles. The right-of-way is already in place for 200 of the miles, as well as some of the track, because it's used by the freight system today. The 4 locations that I mentioned would be the stations. Significant transit-oriented development opportunities, and we believe this could be operational in 2014, mainly because of the 200 miles that we talked about. 100-foot wide corridor, passenger and freight service during those 100 years, 100-year-old corridor. And what that allows for is, from an environmental impact standpoint, the environmental process can be a lot quicker because of the fact that it's an existing transportation corridor. We're also looking at different routes from the East Coast into Orlando, some of those being existing transportation corridors as well. And depending on which one we choose, there could be significant environmental benefits from a timeline perspective. The important thing to also mention is this project would not displace any freight off the line. So what we did is we took the existing freight franchise, kind of locked that in place. We looked at what we would need from a freight perspective after the Panama Canal expansion was completed, looked at those capacity improvements, and then layered on top of that what we would need for passenger. Because obviously it wouldn't make sense for me to stand up here and say we're going to take automobiles off the road and I'm going to replace them with tractor trailers instead. And so what's really important is that we would protect the freight franchise through this project. Joe talked a little bit about the service offering. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's safer, and it's productive time. And that's really what part of the sell is the 3-hour travel time was very important for us to get to. Because when we did focus groups and we did the polling, what we did is we went to the consumer and we said, what do you want in a system? And what we heard back was, we need it to take 3 hours, we want the Wi-Fi system, we want productive travel time, we want real meals. And so that's what we've developed. And what we feel really excited about is we've taken what the consumer wants and we've come up with a system to match what that consumer is asking for. Wi-Fi would be included. Quality meal service, I tell people, think about the old first class meals that you'd get, something analogous to that. First class, coach class I mentioned. And then on the frequent, regularly scheduled round trip service, the important part there is if you miss your 2 o'clock train, I can't tell you that your next train is going to be at 5 o'clock because I'll never get you as a customer again, right? I mean, people who will travel will invariably miss their train. So we've actually modeled this system to be hourly service between Orlando and Miami, 14 round-trip trains, so 28 one-way trains, 400 capacity trains, and we think that frequency will actually give us a really good market penetration. For the speed, south of West Palm Beach would be 79 miles per hour just because of the number of crossings that exist. North of West Palm Beach to where that East Coast point would be where you would turn would be 110 miles an hour. And then depending on the route into Orlando, you're looking at 125 miles per hour. That gives us a 3-hour and 3-minute travel time, which gets us right in that 3-hour sweet spot. The market opportunity is significant. We were actually, really surprised at, as we looked into this. We hired a ridership firm, Lewis Berger, and we also hired a peer review firm, SDG. And obviously, because we're investing significant, equity from our perspective, it was in our best interest to make sure that these ridership numbers were as conservative as possible. And so what we looked at was 50 million people that transit the corridor annually, 95% travel by car. You're looking at a 4+ hour average drive time. You know, unfortunately for me today, I actually leave the Beacon Council and have to drive to Orlando. So I guess I'll be able to update that slide based on how long it takes me to drive today. But also, you've got 2 hubs of the state that are perfectly situated for this. And if you look at the United States and you were going to try to find 2 city pairs that have a lot of business travel and leisure travel between them, and that is in a distance that rail service could actually be successful, Miami to Orlando is that sweet spot. And so when you look even internationally and you look at London to Paris and different city pairs like that, that 250, 300 mile distance is exactly what you're trying to aim for. And so on the north end, you've got, one of the, you got the nation's most visited city, one of the largest convention centers, one of the largest universities. And then when you look at the southern end of the system, you've got major cruise ports, you've got a major international travel destination, you've got a significant amount of opportunity for people that want to come to the South that necessarily don't come here because when they get to Orlando, there's not an easy way to get to South Florida, and vice versa. You've got a lot of people that come to South Florida that would probably extend their stay if they knew that they could add a couple days in another city. And so we believe that that's a really good market for us. As part of our ridership analysis, one thing that we recognized was, and this works in both directions, but one thing that we recognized is when people come to Florida, they tend to pick a city and they tend to stay there. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense when we go international. You go to a city like Paris, you hardly rent a car and say, I'm going to drive around France. You don't get on a bus and say, let me go around France. But if you do go visit other cities, it's usually because of rail. And so what we do is we get a lot of international visitors that come to Florida that tend to stay in the city that they have picked. And then when they go back, they say, next time I come to Florida, I'll go to a second city. And what we realized in our ridership is if somebody's coming to Orlando for 5 days, they're not looking to say, I'm going to spend 2 days in Orlando now and 3 days in Miami. What they're looking to do is say, I'm going to spend my 5 days in Orlando, but if I had a way to get to Miami, I'll tack on another 3-4 days and go to Miami and actually extend their trip. And so we believe that that segment is a really great opportunity for the state of Florida to be able to take people coming here and move them around the state and realize the economic benefits of doing that, because right now that option does not exist. So the due diligence, as I mentioned when I started, has been completed. We hired HDR to do our engineering work. They've developed the route alignments for us, and I talked about the fact that there's a couple different routes we're looking at from the East Coast into Orlando. The travel time is the 3 hours that we talked about. And then they did a 30% design of the system to give us what the initial capital expenditure would be to build the system. Second thing we did the ridership study, and that really gives you the revenue, right? How many people are going to take this? What are the fares going to be? So now I know what my initial investment is. I know what my revenue number is going to be. And then we built an operating model after that, so we knew what our annual expenses are, kind of the simple things to begin to build the business plan. And that's where I mentioned that we, after getting those 3 kind of numbers, and I know I kind of simplified it, but we've come to the conclusion that this is financially viable and we're moving forward with it. From an environmental standpoint, we have had tremendous support from every environmental agency, and I was joking with someone a couple days ago. We had a meeting in Tallahassee on Monday, and I learned of yet another federal agency that has environmental oversight on this project. And so, and I'm sure there's a couple others that we don't know about, but with that said, I think the fact that we're using existing transportation corridors and that there's been a lot of support for this project, really what we've gotten from them is we're going to help you through the process. And what we're not asking the agencies to do is, to skip part of the environmental review, But in the private sector, we're used to having a meeting at 8 a.m. and telling our colleagues, let's get back together at 5 p.m. and discuss what we've the ideas we've come up with. And that's really what we're looking at from the environmental permitting agencies. We really feel that from an environmental standpoint, we will get significant support from the federal and state and local agencies, and that's one of the reasons why we believe an aggressive timeline is doable with this. Station locations. I know where's Bernard? Right here. So Bernard Ziskovich and SOM are two firms that we've announced as our station planners, and Bernard's done a great job with his team at SOM, and we're really proud to have them on board. They're doing great work. They're engaging with stakeholders. But Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm, and Orlando, these are going to be significant stations. These are not going to be what we think about as normal transit-oriented development. And I'll show you an aerial of our Miami site and get into a little more detail. But that's also what's exciting, is we believe that what Bernard and his colleagues at SOM will design for us will be something that as a community we're going to be very proud of, and want to be, and want to be, going to that transit-oriented development and want to be part of the system, and it will actually draw people to this project. And then rolling stock, kind of another exciting part of this is, stations are going to be very identified with this project, but so will the rolling stock. I mean, when you think about, systems, people think about the train. Nobody remembers who built the track or who built the structures or, who did any of that, but they know the train. We're down to 2 teams. Both of those teams have met with the Federal Railroad Administration. We're looking at 10 train sets, a plus or minus $300 million order, and we will be in a position later this summer to make a commitment to one of those teams to begin procurement of those 10 train sets. And again, it's it's not train sets that that anyone's probably seen in the U.S. And people have said, is it going to be like Acela? And I say it's, for those of you that have ridden Amtrak Acela service in the Northeast, concept is the same. First class, business class, Wi-Fi, but something that's really modern and something that really fits into the Florida landscape of what we would want to see here. The other part of this is direct connections into existing transportation systems. When you get to Miami and you get to the 9-acre station that we'll have, you got to be able to move to your end destination. What's great about the site is it's got 2 Metro Rail stops. It's got a people mover stop. What's great about the Fort Lauderdale site that we're talking to Broward County about is it will connect to the Wave, which just got a Tiger grant about a month ago. And that's their streetcar system in downtown. And then West Palm Beach would tie into into the existing bus service. And then in the future, we hope that this would be a jump start to, what Tri-Rail SFRTA has been calling their Fast Start project, and what Florida DOT has been calling the South Florida East Coast Corridor Study, the commuter rail system that Commissioner Sarnoff has been very supportive of. But this would be a jump start for that, because once you get to downtown Miami, people are going to want to get to Aventura and other locations, and that commuter rail system would be what would be built in the corridor as well to allow people to move to those end destinations. We look at express connections to existing Tri-Rail and Amtrak stations, and then once we get the trunk of the system, which is Miami to Orlando, we will continue to look at Tampa and Jacksonville as the expansion lines. And so that's something that we feel is important. Is the end goal can't be Miami to Orlando. It needs to be something that touches as much of the state's population as possible. The other thing I should also mention is Amtrak has always contemplated coming down the East Coast on the FEC to provide service to cities like New Smyrna Beach, or St. Augustine, New Smyrna Beach, Daytona, Stewart, Vero, et cetera. And so this project would not preclude Amtrak from having their one round-trip train. So this is the Miami station, Miami Government Center here. We're obviously on this side of the river. The old Henry Flagler passenger rail station, and that's why it's kind of a trapezoid shape. And what's really neat about this for us is this really has the potential to become that western edge of downtown that really hasn't seen the economic development that other parts of downtown have. And Bernard and like I said, his SOM team have done done a lot of work on the Miami 21 zoning and done a lot of thinking about, how the downtown Miami could continue to enjoy economic development. Very honestly, we hope to be the spark for that, for this part of downtown. We're looking at a development that will be, multi-million square feet. So again, it's not just the station, but you're looking at, and I tell people everything's on the table, from office, residential, hotel, and there's a lot of great developments occurring in the downtown area right now with Brickell City Center and others. And so one of the things that we're doing right now is really understanding what the market potential is there. This will be a phased development without a doubt. But the most important thing about this project is it needs to be porous. When people get to this station, it can't be a fortress where you get trapped in this, large transit-oriented development. Because if people want to get to Government Center, if they want to get to the American Airlines Arena, if they want to get to one of the hotels, restaurants, et cetera, they need to be able to get out quickly, but also have that transit-oriented development be a hub for them if they want to, stay and do something within that development as well. And so one of the challenges that Bernard and his team have is to develop stations that that provide a kind of a iconic structure for the community, but it fits into the architecture of the community. I tell people we don't want to design something that looks like it just fell off from another planet and landed in downtown Miami, and it needs to be something that the community embraces. And so we've been doing a lot of stakeholder meetings and kind of understanding what people's vision is for that part of downtown long term. Going up to Fort Lauderdale. For those of you that can see, I don't know if there's a pointer on this. Yeah, so right here, this 842 that's labeled as Broward Boulevard. And then you got the New River right here and Las Olas. And we call this the north of Broward and south of Broward kind of strategy that we're playing with right now. So when you look at our rail line right here, this right here is the Broward County Intermodal Bus Terminal. This is a county parking garage. You've got county offices, you've got Fort Lauderdale City Hall here. Just a great opportunity in that, in that area for us to be able to develop something that connects into the wave, connects into existing modal, intermodal facilities. And so we've been having very productive conversations. Jose's been, one of the people leading those with the county on what we could do here in Fort Lauderdale. Much smaller footprint than what you see in Miami, but again, significant development opportunity, especially because this part north of Broward has not seen the economic development that the south of Broward area and down Las Olas has seen. And so again, we believe that this will be a good catalyst for development there. West Palm Beach, similarly, we have a kind of a south of downtown and north of downtown strategy. So Okeechobee is on the south side of this map. You've got the south side here where you have City Place, and then the north side where you have the federal courthouse, and then you've got some areas in the middle of the rail line as well in downtown. And again, we're working with the city and the county on identifying what would be the right place to have all these transportation modes connect. And again, it's something that's really exciting, and we've been really fortunate again that I think cities and counties have been waiting for a project like this. They've been thinking about passenger service in the FEC. So it's been great for us as we're walking in, and and instead of them saying, wow, we've never really thought about this, they've said, we've always thought about this, but it's more been from a conceptual level, but let us tell you what our thoughts are and how our bus system and everything else could fit into it and become a feeder for you. Orlando was the complicated one because Orlando doesn't have a true kind of one point where you can put a station and kind of hit everybody. So you have Orlando Airport, you've got the UCF area up here, you've got downtown, you've got Universal and SeaWorld, you've got the Convention Center, and you've got Disney, you've got Medical City, the Lake Nona area that's developing here. So again, when we put this map on the table and we'd go and meet with folks in Central Florida and say, where would you put that one station? Everyone gave you a different answer. So what we've decided is we're gonna put it at Orlando Airport. And what's exciting about this is what you see here is a concept of what's called the South Terminal Complex. So for those of you that are familiar with Orlando Airport, the existing terminal is on the north side of the airport. To the south, there's about 1,000 acres. Orlando Airport's strategic plan shows a new 120-gate terminal, south terminal complex, that really would become kind of the new hub of Orlando, double capacity there. And that was actually moving forward until 9/11 happened. And so if you look at an aerial, there's an automated people mover that goes about halfway between the north terminal and where the south terminal would be. So what's exciting for us is we would become kind of the hub of that new 120-gate terminal. Orlando Airport, in exchange for us putting the station there, would finish the automated people mover. They'd build a 3,500 car garage here, start building the ground transportation here. And so what the airport did in an MOU with us is they committed to $470 million worth of capital improvements if we put the station at the South Terminal Complex. What that will then start is this first 16-gate landside terminal at the airport that I said would eventually grow to a 120-gate terminal. And so for us, because we're investing a significant amount of capital, we're thinking long-term, and we feel that being at the hub of what will be a brand new terminal at Orlando International Airport is the right place to be. What's also great about this is Sunrail is this track right here. And so Sunrail would, for those of you not familiar with Sunrail, it's a tri-rail type system that cuts through downtown Orlando, doesn't connect into the airport. It was a project that was slated for about 2018-19. Since we've announced our project, the community has really kind of rallied and said, how do we move that connection up? Because it's good for the airport, it's good for all aboard Florida, but it's also good to make sure that when Sunrail becomes operational, Sunrail is successful. The impact on Florida is significant, and what's important about this slide is this is just the rail piece of it. This isn't the station piece. This isn't the $470 million from Orlando at Orlando Airport. It doesn't include what the terminal would be. It doesn't include other real estate opportunities that would come out of the ground that folks have reached out to us and said, if you build your 9-acre station in downtown Miami, this is what we're going to do with our property. It's 6,000 people to build the rail line. It's 1,000 permanent jobs after we build the system. And what's important about that, like I said, it includes no multipliers. It's not I tell people it's not the job that's created at a local deli because you've created a construction job. This is the number of people that you would physically see on there. Substantial environmental benefits. Getting a significant amount of cars off the road. The value of life from getting those cars off the road. And when you do all the calculations that Florida DOT and US DOT do, it's a significant benefit. And then I said the additional benefits are the thousands of additional direct jobs, the increase in property values, increased opportunities for tourism and getting people to be able to move even in the intra-region, because what can't be lost is there will be some people that move between West Palm, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami. I know the commissioner will be happy to hear this, is we've kind of modeled out what some local tax revenue would be based on this project, and there's some significant local taxes that would be generated as well. I'll end with the project timeline and costs, just to kind of tell you where we are. So March 22nd, we announced the project. We've completed the ridership engineering and environmental reviews in the second quarter. We're now focused on final corridor selection from the East Coast into Orlando, and we'll make that known sometime in the third quarter. We believe we can commence construction on this in early 2013, at least on the southern segment, and then work our way north. We think that would be, that will also just create a lot of momentum and excitement for the project, and like I mentioned, be operational by the end of 2014. Total project costs are over $1 billion. That does not include, when it says station development, the nomenclature we use internally is station is for where the train pulls in and you get off and you're at the platform. Transit-oriented development is what's kind of wrapped around that from an office, residential, hotel, et cetera. And so that's the kind of the uses of where the costs would go. Now, like I said, we're really excited. We've got a great team. We're in the process of staffing up for this project, and it's been exciting. And I should have also mentioned Jack Lowell, who I'm sorry that is sitting back there, who's part of our Flagler team.
I'll ask you the first question. Are you going to double track the line at this stage?
The entire line will be double tracked, and there will be portions of the line that will be triple tracked.
Thank you, Jack. And Jack, our immediate past chair, so welcome. Questions? Yes, sir.
how far will, or how long will it be round trip for somebody going to downtown Orlando? Is the Sunrail immediate, or is that after the fact?
Yeah, so Sunrail, most likely the connection into the airport would happen after we were operational. You know, we'd love to time it, and when I say after, you know, hopefully within a year, if everything worked out perfectly. So travel time, like I said, would be 3 hours and 3 minutes. The goal would be, as we're building these stations where you walk off the platform and you literally walk across the platform and you would get onto the commuter rail system, and then it's about a 20-minute, 25-minute ride into downtown. You know, when you think about stations in Europe, you know, that's the way stations are designed, is you have to have the platforms all in one place, so when a passenger gets off, they're not having to exit one station to enter into another station. And so all of these stations will be built to accommodate the future commuter rail. So Orlando for Sunrail, the South Florida stations for, you know, eventual commuter rail system on the FEC corridor.
Up here? And then, okay, Joe, we'll get you.
When you start operations in 2014, where do you expect to be operating between? And when do you expect to have the whole program, hourly service, Miami-Orlando up and running?
Yeah, so we will not start the system unless we can do hourly service. We really believe that we can't go out to the public and say, you know, on day one it's going to be every 4 hours, but trust us, it'll eventually get to every hour, because, you know, market penetration is very important for this project. So we will start the project, we will start operations when we can get that hourly service. With respect to what would be operational, a lot of that depends on the environmental process that we're going through. And so I think over the next several months we'll have, you know, much more clarity on the timing of certain environmental permits, and then that will lead to, you know, when we could start construction on certain segments.
Good morning. How would you produce the process? Would you think of a design build for the one single entity to produce the entire project, or you already have different segments?
So we just brought on a senior vice president for rail infrastructure, a guy by the name of John Flint, who was with T.Y. Lin. He ran T.Y. Lin's rail and infrastructure practice. That's part of what he's looking at right now, is how we would do that. Most likely, these stations and the construction of the rail line would be done as 2 separate packages for sure. And then within the rail line, I could see at least 2, maybe 3 packages. The East Coast to Orlando being 1 package, and then at minimum, or not minimum, but you'd have the East Coast point to Miami being 1 or 2 packages. As a design build. As a design build. So work within the existing FEC corridor, you know, could be for one design build team. But the East Coast to Orlando, because it's very different from building on a right-of-way of building the, you know, some structures that you have to cross the St. Johns River, you have to cross the Econ River, you got to cross I-95. So the type of construction you have to do on that segment is very different from what you do in the right-of-way.
I think we have one right in front here. Oh.
For the project to be financially sustainable, what type of volume in terms of traffic are you estimating, and how long do you think it'll take to get there?
I need everybody in this room taking it every day. So if you make that deal with me, then we're financially viable. Seriously, we you know, we need a kind of a low percentage penetration of that 50 million ridership number that travels between the corridors right now. So we haven't made our ridership study public, but we feel very confident that the way we approached it was a baseline number is what we've created our financial model off of. Usually when you see ridership numbers, it includes a baseline number, it includes an inducement number. We have held out that inducement number. An inducement is, you know, assuming that you do deals with, you know, theme parks and airlines and hotels and, you know, and cruise lines. So we've held all of that out of our base case ridership number. And so based on that, it's financially viable. If we can induce people on top of that baseline number, then it's a healthy project.
Right here in front.
Is any interface planned with local commuter rail, and are there any intermediary stations planned, smaller stations?
So there's no smaller stations being planned, but the interface would be at the existing station. So Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm would be designed in order to accommodate a future commuter rail system. So when Bernard and his team are designing the station, they're designing it that allows for those future platforms to be constructed, those additional tracks to be built. Just like I mentioned at Orlando Airport, that station would be designed in a way that would allow that Sunrail connection to come in. So we're doing it with that foresight, so we don't have to go back and redesign the station part of the development if a future commuter rail service were to take place.
And would that be along your existing right-of-ways, the commuter segment?
That is what's being studied by both Tri-Rail and Florida DOT, and a 100-foot wide corridor would allow a commuter rail system to exist as well. But to be clear, that project requires an operating subsidy from a public entity, and it requires a significant amount of capital up front. And so the two projects are not tied together from a timeline perspective. That project, my guess is once we get operational, the commuter rail project will hopefully gain some more momentum.
Right back here in the back.
Will you have stops in Port Pierce and Vero Beach at some point?
I couldn't see where that question came from.
Right.
But, oh, okay. So it's a 4-stop system right now. There could be an additional stop in the future. A lot of that's based on ridership demand. And so, right now as we did our ridership study, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm, and Orlando showed the greatest number of riders, but also more importantly got us to that magic 3-hour travel time. Even though you stop at an additional station for 1 minute, it's the dwell time at each one of these stations, the deceleration of the train to get into that station and the acceleration to get out of that station, you really add about 15, 20 minutes to the travel time. And so, you got to balance that. And, for people that a 3-hour and 15, 3-hour and 30-minute ride gets them to not take the system versus having an additional stop, you have to weigh that from a financial standpoint.
1 or 2 more questions, I think. A couple, maybe 3.
How do you guys just use those magnets they use in like roller coasters and stuff to accelerate?
The maglev?
Yeah. I wanted to know, how much is it going to cost to go from Miami to Orlando?
Okay, so we get that question a lot, obviously, and what I tell people is if you go online today and 4 weeks out you book a flight on American from Miami to Orlando or Southwest from Fort Lauderdale to Orlando, it's about $69 to $79 one way. On a 230-mile trip, just if you use the IRS reimbursement rate of 55.5 cents, you're looking at about $115, $120 that it costs you to go for gas, et cetera. One of the things we understood in the focus groups was people understand the cost to travel by plane. They don't necessarily understand how much it costs to drive. So if you asked people how much does it cost for you to drive from Miami to Orlando, the numbers that they would throw out were significantly lower than that number I just mentioned is the IRS reimbursement rate. So part of our marketing strategy has to be to get people to understand what the true cost to travel between those cities are. With that said, I also understand that I've got to convince you to get out of your car or out of the plane to try a new mode of service. And so if I came to you and said, I'm going to give you a price that's the same as what you're paying today, getting a modal shift is very difficult. And so we need to be cost competitive to those price points. And so, I'm not going to throw out the magic number today of what it is, but I think that gives you some of the bookends of what we're looking at, of what those one-way fares are about 4 weeks out and what the true travel cost is. When you look at the first class on the system, on a Friday night at 5 p.m., you go and book a one-way flight on American, it's $450 between Miami and Orlando. Now, today, if you book, and you're flying in a couple hours, it's about $170, $180. But again, so, day of travel, someone that's in the first class seat, you're probably looking at something that's comparable to that price range too.
The gentleman in the back.
Couple of questions. How are you proposing to finance it? And the location downtown, is that land that you've already secured? And finally, what kind of power system are you planning to use on these trains?
I'm sorry, what was the last one?
What kind of power?
Power,
system?
okay. So The 9 acres here in downtown Miami is owned by Florida East Coast Industries. Like I mentioned, it's the old Henry Flagler passenger rail station that's been a holding of the company for decades. So that land is secure. The power for the trains, it's going to be diesel power. As much as everyone would love to see an electric train, I think if I was standing up here saying that I was going to put up high tension electric wires through downtown Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm, the commissioner would probably take me out and shoot me. So that really isn't an option because of the density of the development in South Florida. And there was a third question you had, financing. So there'll be most likely debt and/or equity raised for this project. Florida East Coast Industries is owned by funds managed by Fortress Investment Group. So we will be looking at different financing options from the private sector. But it will most likely be a combination of debt and equity.
I think you have one more question. That can be answered. It might have already been answered. Anybody else? Frank? Well, thank you, and let me bring Frank up to say a couple words.
Thank you. Thank you very much. But before we break, I want to just a couple of short commercials from us. Number one, I want to thank Sofitel Hotel again. If you haven't had a chance to partake of the goodies out there, please do so. They were not made by little elves in the back room here. They were made up at the Sofitel, and they, get up in the middle of the night to make this stuff and bring it here. So we appreciate it. There's a couple things I wanted to say. Number one, when we told you we were going to be sold out, we were not lying. So when we have these again in the future, and we will have these every month, please register early. Please try and, we try to accommodate everybody. We had calls yesterday saying, please, can we come? Showed you how interested everybody was. So we try to accommodate you. For those who had to stand, we're sorry, but we try to get everybody here on time. We're actually going to try and get some more chairs in here for our next one, which leads me to that if there are certain speakers or certain topics that any of you would like to hear in a setting such as this, we're trying to keep it small and intimate so you can have a chance to interact with the folks as opposed to a large gathering. Email me, fnero@beaconcouncil.com. Tell me the topic you would like or the kind of speaker you would like, and we'll try and get him here. We've had we had Steve Owens, who talked about the Swire property. We've had the governor here. We've had a variety. The superintendent of schools, who we think will be coming back again in the fall to talk about the new school year, etc. But if you have topics, let us know, and we'd be happy to get the speaker and get it in here. We're going to do these at least once a month. We've got 2 events that we want to talk to you about. One is our annual meeting, which will be on the 10th of October. It's going to be at the Hotel Intercom. That is a meeting where we not only make Joe official as the chair and put in our new board, but it also is where we announced our results. And we will announce all the projects that we closed this year, the kinds of activities that the Beacon Council undertook. So if you really want to know, well, what did those guys do this past year, come to the annual meeting. And I think you will also hear, we hope will be about an exciting project from Cesar Conde, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Univision. And so he will be our guest speaker, and I think you'll find that to be very interesting as well. And then finally, on the 11th of December is our annual key ceremony. Now, what is a key ceremony? Well, we get our county mayor, whoever that may be, and our local mayors, and we actually recognize all of the companies that have located or expanded in Miami-Dade County in the past year. So if you want to meet them and actually have an opportunity to interact with these companies, that's the place to go. It's also our annual holiday party, and this year we're very, very pleased that it'll be at Vizcaya. So, they're doing some rehab. It should be done by then. It'll be a chance to see some of the new work. So that's our story, and we're sticking to it. We welcome you here very much. Thank you all for coming, and register early for our next breakfast. We'll hope to see you there. Thank you.